The sky above Ethon 4 was on fire. It had not always looked like that. Once that sky was a deep shade of violet during the day and filled with soft, silver stars at night. The Selhari people had looked up at it for thousands of years. They had written songs about it. They had named the stars and told stories about them to their children. But now the sky was broken. It was full of smoke and light. The wrong kind of light. The kind that came from burning ships, from explosions high in the atmosphere, from the slow and terrible work of a fleet that had come not to visit, but to destroy. On the ground in the deep stone corridors of the Great Council Hall, Elder Archivist Vainsol stood very still and watched a screen. He was old even by Selhari standards. His body was tall and thin, like most of his kind, with long arms that bent at 2 joints instead of 1. His skin, if you could call it that, was a dark, deep blue, and it gave off a faint glow. All Selhari glowed. It was part of their biology, a soft bioluminescence that got stronger when they felt strong emotions and dimmer when they were tired or sad. Right now, Vaiansol's glow was very dim. It had been dim for 3 days. Around him, the council hall was full of noise. Other council members moved back and forth, shouting at each other, waving data slates, pointing at projection screens that showed maps of the planet's orbital defense line. What was left of it? The Vorkai had hit the outer defense grid first, then the mid-range stations. Now they were working on the inner ring, and after that, there would be nothing standing between the planet's surface and the full force of the 7th Conquest Fleet. Counselor Devon Ray, a younger Selhari with bright orange markings on her arms, rushed past Van Sol and grabbed his shoulder. Van Sol, she said quickly, the defense minister needs the historical archive on Vorkai attack patterns. Past invasions, tactical data, anything we have. Can you access it? Yes, Van Sol said. I can access it. Then go, there's no time. There is also, he said slowly, not looking away from his screen. No point. Devon Ray stared at him. Her own glow flickered with frustration. What do you mean there is no point? We have to fight. We have to... The Vorkai have taken 14 worlds in the last 60 years, Vainsol said calmly. All 14 of them had defense grids. All 14 of them sent emergency signals to the Conclave of Worlds. All 14 of them fell within a week of first contact. Our outer ring fell in 11 hours. He paused. What tactical data would you like me to find? Devon Ray opened her mouth. Then she closed it. Then she walked away very quickly, because there was nothing she could say to that. Van Sol turned back to his screen. He was not watching the battle feeds like everyone else. He was not watching the maps of the orbital grid, or the casualty reports coming in from the northern continent, or the desperate communications being sent to Conclave headquarters begging for help that was not going to come. He had looked at all of those things. He understood them well enough. What he was watching now was something different, something that had appeared on his personal monitor 40 minutes ago and had not left his mind since. It was a signal, not a new signal, not something from the battle outside. It was old, older than Van Sol himself, older than anyone alive on Ethan 4, older than the Vorkai Dominion had even existed as a political body. It had come in on a frequency that, as far as anyone in the Conclave knew, had been dead for 3,000 years, a frequency that no civilization currently used, a frequency that had one single entry in the official communications registry listed under a species name that most modern scholars treated as mythology. The entry said, Reserved Human Diplomatic Band, last active, year 0 of the silence. Van Sol had been an archivist for 60 years. In that time, he had read almost every document in the Selhari National Archive and a significant portion of the Conclave's shared historical database. He had read about every war, every treaty, every lost civilization, every first contact record. He had developed a habit over those 60 years of treating history as something real and physical, not just words on a page, but the actual residue of things that had actually happened. He believed that if you read carefully enough, history could still surprise you. It was surprising him right now. He pressed a key and the signal expanded on his screen. It was short. It was encrypted in a cipher that the Conclave's systems had struggled to break. Not because the cipher was particularly sophisticated, but because it was so old that no active decryption library had the base keys for it. Vensol had spent the last 40 minutes finding those keys in the deep archive. He had just finished. The message decoded in front of him. It was 3 words in Old Galactic Standard, the trade language that had been spoken across known space before the current conclave dialect replaced it. 3 words. We saw everything. Van Sol read them 3 times. Then he sat down, which was unusual for him because he normally preferred to stand. And he stayed very still for almost a full minute. Then he opened the restricted archive. The restricted archive was not secret exactly. It was not locked behind security codes or forbidden to access. It was simply the part of the archive that no one ever looked at. Because it was considered to be full of legends and exaggerations, and the kind of stories that old civilizations told when they were trying to make themselves feel important. It was the mythological section, in practice, even if it was filed under historical accounts. Unverified. Van Sol knew what was in it. He had read it all long ago, in the first years of his career, when he still had the time and energy to read everything. He had found it fascinating then. Most of his colleagues had found it embarrassing, the sort of old nonsense that proper scholars were supposed to leave behind. He found the human files without difficulty. They were large, larger than the files for most species, which was itself interesting. Someone a very long time ago had gone to a great deal of trouble to collect and preserve information about humanity, when that person had clearly believed it was important. The oldest documents were simple, physical descriptions. Humans were bipedal, 2 legs, 2 arms, 1 head. They were, by galactic standards, extremely fragile. Their skin had no armor, no scales, no natural protection of any kind. They could not survive in vacuum without suits. They were vulnerable to dozens of environmental conditions that other species could tolerate without difficulty. Their lifespan was remarkably short, 60 to 100 of their homeworld years under natural conditions. In a galaxy where many species live for centuries or millennia, a human lifetime was considered almost embarrassingly brief. And yet, the next section of the archive was different in tone. It had been written by a scholar of the Tethari Collective, a civilization that no longer existed. It absorbed into the conclave 3,000 years ago, and it had the careful, deliberate style of someone who was choosing their words very carefully because they were afraid of not being believed. The scholar described a period, roughly 4,000 years before the present day, when humanity had first made contact with the wider galaxy. They had arrived, the scholar wrote, as a minor species from a single star system on the outer rim. No colonies, no allies, no particular advantage in technology. They were behind the major civilizations of the time by several centuries in most fields. Within 500 years, they had caught up with all of them, not by being given the technology, not by trading for it or stealing it, by developing it, sometimes from scratch, and sometimes by looking at what already existed and finding 3 different ways to improve it. The scholar used a word that Van Sol had to look up because it was not common in modern galactic standard. The word meant something like relentless ingenuity, the quality of never stopping, never accepting that a problem could not be solved, never treating a closed door as anything other than a door that had not yet been opened. But it was the next section that Van Sol had always remembered, the part that had stayed with him all these years, filed at the back of his mind like a thing he was not sure what to do with. It was a record of the first major war that humanity had fought against another spacefaring civilization. A conflict now called the Breach Wars, which most modern scholars treated as a minor historical footnote. The opposing civilization had attacked human colonies on 3 separate occasions, apparently believing that the humans would either surrender or be unable to retaliate at scale. They were wrong on both counts. But what struck Van Sol was not the fact that the humans had won. Many civilizations won wars. What struck him was how they fought. Other species, the scholar noted, went to war for reasons that made sense in a straightforward way. Territory, resources, survival, dominance. They fought until the cost was too high, and then they stopped. They had a practical relationship with violence. It was a tool, and like any tool, you put it down when the job was done or when it was breaking you. Humans fought for reasons. That was the word the scholar used, and they had underlined it. which was unusual for a scholar writing in that period. Not for territory alone, not for survival alone, for things that had no physical form: justice, principle, the memory of the dead, the protection of people they had never met and would never meet. They would absorb terrible losses in a war they were technically losing and still not stop, because they had decided that the reason mattered more than the cost. The scholar concluded with a line that Van Sol had memorized the first time he read it, decades ago. "Do not wound a human and expect them to die from it. Expect them to remember." He scrolled further, past the breach wars, past the early expansion period, past the first conclave negotiations, in which humanity had apparently been a frustrating party to deal with because they kept insisting on including clauses about the rights of non-member species, hitting which no one else thought was relevant, past the long middle period of galactic history, during which humans had colonized dozens of systems, built alliances, fought several more wars, and in general made themselves into one of the most significant civilizations in known space. And then he reached the section marked "The Silence." 3,000 years ago, on a date recorded precisely in every archive that still existed, every human signal had stopped. Every human ship had returned to human space. Every human diplomat had said goodbye, politely, formally, with no explanation given, and gone home. The borders of human space had gone quiet. Ships that ventured close reported no hostile action, no communications, nothing. Just silence. The theories were numerous: plague, internal collapse, transcendence to a higher form of existence, a voluntary isolation. Some scholars had argued they had simply died out, that the short lifespan had finally caught up with the civilization as a whole, or that some internal conflict had burned them down to nothing. Van Sol had never fully believed any of those theories. He looked back at his screen, at the three words still glowing there in old galactic standard. "We saw everything." A sound made him look up. It was one of the younger archive assistants, a Salhari named Fenlo, who worked the overnight monitoring shift and mostly kept to himself. Fenlo was standing in the doorway of the main archive room with a look on his face that Van Sol had not seen before. A wide, stunned expression, his glow pulsing in rapid, irregular flashes, which meant extreme surprise. "Elder Van Sol," Fenlo said. His voice was not quite steady. "Hanam, the Deep Space Relay Network, the Outer Rim sensors, they've just sent a priority alert." Van Sol was already standing. "What did they detect?" Fenlo opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Ships," he said. "A lot of ships, moving in from the Outer Rim. They're moving faster than our sensor models say is physically possible. But the readings are consistent across 17 separate relay stations, so the system is certain it's not an error." He paused. "The Vorkai BattleNet has flagged it too. Across all their encrypted frequencies, there's been nothing. Complete silence. For the last 4 minutes. Van Sol felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not hope exactly. Not yet. Something quieter than hope. Something that felt like a very old door. One that had been closed for 3,000 years. Should it be beginning very slowly to open? "How many ships?" he asked. Fenlo looked at his data slate. He looked at it again, as if he expected the number to change if he checked a second time. It did not change. He looked up at Van Sol. "We don't have a number," he said. "The sensor net can't count them. There are too many." Outside, the burning sky flickered. For a moment, just a moment, the sounds of the Vorkai bombardment seemed to pause, as if even the weapons were uncertain what to do, as if the war itself had heard something and was waiting to see what came next. Van Sol turned back to his screen. He looked at the three words one more time. Then he looked out through the high stone window at the damaged sky, at the smoke and the fire, and the distant shapes of enemy ships still hanging in orbit like dark stones. Oh, he thought about what he had read all those years ago, about a civilization that had never learned to put things down, that remembered everything, that had looked at the galaxy 3,000 years ago and made a decision, a quiet, deliberate, patient decision, and then disappeared to carry it out. He thought about the signal on the dead frequency. "We saw everything." He thought about the Vorkai going silent, and for the first time in 3 days, Vane's soul's glow began to brighten. "Fenlo," he said quietly. "Yes, Elder." "Wake the full council, all of them, right now." He paused. "And tell them to look at the outer rim sensors. Tell them to look carefully." He folded his long hands together and continued to stare at the sky. "Tell them that I believe something that has been asleep for a very long time has just opened its eyes." Fenlo hesitated. "And if they ask me what it is?" Van's soul was quiet for a moment. The burning sky reflected in his eyes. His glow was steady now and growing. "Tell them," he said, "that it is the answer to every distress call this galaxy has ever sent into silence and heard nothing back." He looked at the 3 words on the screen one last time. "Tell them the humans heard us," and they came. Outside in the cold dark far above the burning world, the outer rim sensor net was still counting, still trying to find an upper limit to the number of ships moving in perfect formation across the edge of known space. It had not found one yet. The formation moved on, patient and precise and absolutely enormous, the way a thing moves when it has been preparing for a very long time and is finally, at last, done preparing. It moved toward the light. It moved toward the fire. It moved toward Ethon 4, where a world was burning and a very old archivist was standing at a stone window with his hands folded and his glow burning bright for the first time in days. And it did not slow down. War Master Drek Khan had never lost a campaign. This was not something he said out loud very often, because in Vorkai culture, boasting about your record was considered a sign of insecurity. A true warrior did not need to announce his victories. His presence was the announcement. But it was a fact, and it was a fact that defined him in the same way that bones defined a body. It was the structure underneath everything else, invisible, but holding it all up. He was large even by Vorkai standards. His people were reptilian in nature, thick-scaled, heavy-boned, with broad, flat heads and eyes set wide apart for excellent peripheral vision. Most Vorkai were a dull brownish-gray color, the color of the rocky homeworld they had come from. Drek Khan was darker than average, almost black, with deep green markings along his neck and shoulders that indicated his rank and bloodline. He wore no ceremonial armor on his command ship. Ceremonial armor was for parades and political events. On a warship in the middle of a campaign, he wore his rank insignia and nothing else, because anything more would have been a performance, and he did not perform. He stood at the main tactical display of the Vorkai Pride, his flagship, the largest warship in the 7th Conquest Fleet, and watched the final stages of the Selhari orbital grid collapse with the calm satisfaction of someone watching a thing they expected to happen, happening exactly as expected. "Outer defense ring is fully neutralized, War Master," said Fleet Commander Aerith Sol, standing to his left. Aerith Sol was young for her rank, fast-thinking, extremely efficient. She was one of the few officers Drek Khan allowed to brief him without being spoken to first. "The inner ring will fall within 6 hours. After that, the planet's surface is open." "Good," Drek Khan said. "The Selhari Council has sent 3 additional distress signals to Conclave headquarters in the last 2 hours," Aerith Sol continued. "No response as expected. The Conclave has no military force positioned within response range, and their nearest member state with independent warships is 11 days away at standard transit speed." 11 days, Drek Khan said. "We'll be done in 4. He was probably right. The campaigns always went the same way. The target civilization had a defense grid that looked impressive on paper and fell apart under real pressure. They sent signals asking for help. No help came. They either surrendered or died in place. Either outcome was acceptable to the Vorkai Dominion. A civilization that surrendered could be put to work. A civilization that fought to the end was removed as a future problem. Both had their practical value. It was, Drek Khan felt, a very rational system. He was about to ask for the latest surface mapping data when a sound on the other side of the bridge made him turn. The sound was unusual, and which was why it caught his attention. It was the sound of a Vorkai officer being surprised. A sharp, involuntary intake of breath, followed by sudden silence. Vorkai officers were not supposed to be surprised. They were supposed to be in control of their responses at all times. When one of them made that sound, it meant something was genuinely wrong. The officer was Sivak, the fleet's chief intelligence analyst. Sivak was a small Vorkai, smaller than average, with lighter coloring and quick darting eyes. He was not a warrior in the traditional sense, and he knew it, which was why he had gone into intelligence work instead of field command. He was very good at his job. He was usually the calmest person in any room because he had a habit of knowing things before they became problems. Right now, he did not look calm, and he was standing at his station with his eyes fixed on his screen, and his scales doing the thing Vorkai scales did when their owner was under stress, laying flat and tight against the skin, making him look thinner than usual. "Sivak," Drek Khan said. His voice was neutral, which from a Vorkai War Master meant you have exactly one chance to explain yourself. Sivak looked up. He glanced at Arith Sol, then back at Drek Khan. Then he said in a very quiet voice, "War Master, I need to show you something. I think it should be a private briefing." Drek Khan looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once and walked to the side chamber off the main bridge. Sivak followed. The door closed behind them. The side chamber was small and functional. A table, 4 seats, a wall-mounted screen. Drek Khan stood rather than sat, which he almost always did. Sivak sat down because his legs were not entirely steady, and he did not trust them to hold him without it being visible. The outer rim sensors have detected a large formation of unidentified vessels approaching from deep space, Sivak began. "I'm certain you'll receive the full report shortly. The formation is very large, larger than any fleet in current conclave records." He paused. "When the initial alert came in, I did the standard procedure. Cross-reference against all known military forces, all known species, all on-record fleet movements." He paused again. There was no match. "Which means it's either a sensor error or an unknown contact," Drek Khan said. "Yes, and the sensor data is verified across multiple independent relay stations. That's so I ruled out error." Sivak's claws moved briefly over the edge of the table, a nervous gesture he would normally have controlled. "So I went to the full archive, not just current records, deep archive, historical files going back 3,000 years. He looked at the War Master. "I found a match." Drek Khan said nothing. He waited. Sivak pressed a key. The screen on the wall came to life, showing a file header. The date on the file made Drek Khan's eyes narrow slightly. 3,000 years ago. The file was classified at the highest level, a classification designation that Drek Khan had seen on files before, but rarely, and only for things the Dominion wanted very thoroughly forgotten. "This file," Sivak said, "is the record of the 7th colonial contact event, year 3004 before present. It is not taught in military academies. It is not included in the standard historical record. It has been reclassified to this security level twice in 3,000 years, each time by a different Dominion administration." He folded his hands on the table. "I only found it because the search algorithm I used was looking for fleet signature patterns, not historical events. It matched on a signal characteristic from the archive." "What is the contact event?" Drek Khan asked. Sivak told him. 3,000 years ago, a Vorkai colonial expansion fleet, 40 warships, a significant force for that era, had been operating on the outer rim of explored space. They had encountered a small, recently established colony on a minor planet. The colony was inhabited by a species not yet formally registered with the wider galactic community. In the species was bipedal, soft-skinned, and had no orbital weapons. The fleet commander, a war master of the old order named Geth Ban, had assessed it as a trivial conquest. The fleet had moved in. None of them came back. Drek Khan was quiet for a moment. 40 ship, he said. 40 ships, Sivak confirmed. The colony had no fleet, no orbital weapons. What it had, according to the partial transmission recovered from one of the Vorkai vessels before all signals were lost, was a very large number of inhabitants who were apparently not willing to wait for formal engagement. The transmission describes them using their own colony infrastructure as weapons, accelerating metal cargo containers at Vorkai vessels using their freight loading systems, reprogramming the colony's automated mining equipment to target ship hulls, taking captured Vorkai weapons from the first boarding parties and using them before the boarding parties had even finished their attack. He paused. The last transmission from Geth Ban's vessel says, And I am reading directly. They are not fighting like a colony defending itself. They are fighting like something that has been waiting for an excuse. Drek Khan was looking at the screen now, not at Sivak. His eyes were moving across the data. The colony species, he said. What were they? Sivak said the word. It was a short word, one syllable. It was a word that, in most modern galactic archives, appeared under the category of extinct or mythological civilizations. It was a word that, when spoken in the right context, made certain very old scholars stop what they were doing and pay close attention. Human, Sivak said. When the word sat in the room for a moment, Drek Khan turned and looked at him. His expression had not changed. It almost never did. But there was something behind his eyes that Sivak, who was very good at reading Vorkai faces, identified as the earliest, most controlled stage of a reaction that the War Master was working very hard to keep from becoming visible. Humans, Drek Khan said, are extinct. They have been gone for 3,000 years. They are a footnote in pre-conclave history. Yes, Sivak said. That is what every current archive states. He pressed another key. A second file opened. But I found something else. In the same deep archive section, a record from 1,100 years ago, midpoint between the silence and the present day, in which a conclave survey vessel, in operating near the outer boundary of what was formerly human space, detected signs of active construction on a planetary body. Large-scale construction. The survey team filed a report. The report was reviewed at conclave level and classified. The classification reason given was, prevent public disorder. Sivak looked up. Someone knew, War Master. At some point, someone knew they were still there, and the decision was made to say nothing. The room was very quiet. Drek Khan moved to the window. Outside the ship, space was dark and cold, and full of the distant wreckage of Selhari defense platforms. He looked at it without seeing it. He was thinking very rapidly, in the precise, undecorated way he always thought about tactical problems. The formation on the outer rim sensors, he said. I believe it is them, Sivak said. Yes. You believe they have been in their own space for 3,000 years, not dying, not collapsing, building. I believe so. Show me the sensor data on the formation. Sivak displayed it. He had already run the numbers 3 times, hoping to find an error. There was no error. The formation was moving at a speed that exceeded anything in the current conclave's technological range. Not by a small amount, but by a significant factor. The energy signatures were unlike any recorded drive technology, and the count kept growing, because the outer rim sensor net was still resolving the full shape of the formation, still working its way through the data, and the number it had reached so far was already the largest fleet figure Sivak had ever seen in any record, historical or current. Drek Khan looked at the number. He said nothing for a very long time. Then, how long do we have before they reach Ethon 4 system? At their current speed, approximately 9 hours. Finish the planet before they arrive. Sivak hesitated. This was not something he would normally do with a War Master. Sir, if the historical record is accurate, if this formation is what I think it is, then finishing the Selhari operation is unlikely to change their response. Based on the colony contact event, based on the message they have sent. What message? Sivak had been hoping to delay this part. The formation transmitted a signal approximately 40 minutes ago. Very short, 3 words in Old Galactic Standard. He read them. We saw everything. Drek Khan looked at the sensor display for a long moment. At the shape of the formation, growing clearer as the relay stations updated. At the speed readout, which had not decreased. At the energy signature, which no Vorkai engineer would have been able to fully explain. Send the cultural files on humans to my personal terminal, he said finally. Everything we have, including what we deleted. He turned from the window. His face was composed. His voice was steady. He was War Master Drek Khan, and he had never lost a campaign. I want to understand what I'm dealing with. He walked to the door and opened it. On the main bridge, Arith Sol and the other officers were already exchanging looks. They had begun receiving the full sensor reports, and their expressions showed the earliest stages of confusion turning into something else. Drek Khan stepped back onto the bridge and spoke. Continue the Selhari operation, he said, be loudly enough for the whole bridge to hear. Full pace, and send word to the subfleet commanders. I want combat readiness across all vessels by the time I finish my review. He paused. Something is coming. I intend to be ready for it. No one on the bridge asked what was coming. They were Vorkai warriors. They prepared first and asked later. Only Sivak, following behind him, allowed himself a single moment of private honesty as he looked at the sensor display one more time, at the formation, at the count, which had grown again while they were in the side room, at the drive signatures that should not have been possible. He thought about Gethban's last transmission. They are fighting like something that has been waiting for an excuse. 3,000 years, he thought. 3,000 years of being quiet. Or 3,000 years of watching the galaxy go on without them while they built and prepared and waited. Sivak was a very rational person. He dealt in data and facts and the logical conclusions that followed from them. He did not believe in mysticism or legend or the kind of dramatic stories that old civilizations used to fill the gaps in their understanding of the universe. But looking at that sensor display, at the shape of what was coming and the speed at which it was coming and the perfect absolute discipline of the formation, every ship in exact position, not a single vessel out of alignment over what must have been an enormous distance. He felt something that all his training and rationality could not entirely suppress. He felt that they had made a mistake, a very old mistake, and that it was at last coming to collect. The ship was called HFY Covenant. It was not the largest ship in the human fleet, not by a long distance. It was a mid-sized vessel by human standards, which meant that by any other civilization standards, it was a substantial warship. But next to the great carriers and deep strike cruisers at the back of the formation, it looked modest, almost quiet. It moved ahead of the main fleet at a steady pace, alone, the way a single person might walk ahead of a large group to knock on a door. Inside the Covenant, in the main communications chamber, Admiral Diplomat Sarah Voss sat in a plain chair in front of a plain table and read through her files one more time. She had read them many times already. She knew them well. But reading was a habit she had developed over 40 years of service, a way of grounding herself before a difficult conversation, of making sure that what she was about to say was based on fact and not on emotion. There was going to be plenty of opportunity for emotion today, she suspected. She preferred to meet it well prepared. Voss was 63 years old. She had short gray hair cut close to her head, dark eyes that were steady and attentive, and the kind of face that had been weathered by a great deal of time in difficult places. There were lines around her eyes and mouth, not from unhappiness, but from years of concentration and of the specific expression that a person's face settles into when they spend a lot of time being the only calm person in a room full of people who are not calm. She was wearing a uniform. It was not a flashy uniform. Dark navy blue, clean lines, the rank insignia on the collar, the small emblem on the chest. The scarred sphere wrapped in laurel that served as the official seal of the Human Diplomatic and Military Commission. No medals, though she had earned enough to cover the uniform twice. Medals were for ceremonies, and she was not here for a ceremony. She was here to have a conversation. 5 minutes to communications range, Admiral, said her aide, a young officer named Lieutenant Kavar, from the doorway. Thank you, she said without looking up. The formation is holding position 12,000 kilometers behind us. Good. The Vorkai BattleNet is active across all frequencies. They're tracking us. Also good, she closed the file. Make sure the relay is open to the Conclave of Worlds Emergency Broadcast Band and the Selhari Planetary Network. I want this transmission received as widely as possible. Kavar hesitated. We're broadcasting to everyone? Including everyone, Voss said. Yes. She looked up at him. Her eyes were steady. If this is going to mean anything at all, then everyone needs to see exactly how it happens. Every word, every decision. No private channels, no backrooms. This is not that kind of conversation. Kavar nodded and went back to his station. Voss stood up, straightened her uniform jacket, and walked to the communications platform at the center of the chamber. It was a circular space, slightly raised with holographic projectors built into the floor. When the link opened, it would show her the party on the other end in full scale. and show them the same. She wanted them to see her clearly. She wanted there to be no ambiguity about what she was and what she was doing there. The console chimed. The link was open. The holographic display filled with the image of War Master Drek Khan. She had studied his profile. She knew his record. She knew what he had done to 14 worlds, and she knew what he was currently doing to the 15th. She looked at him now. The size of him, the dark scales, the wide-set eyes that were studying her with the exact same focused attention she was giving him. And she felt the thing that she always felt at this kind of moment, the thing she had learned to use rather than suppress. It was not anger. It was something steadier and colder and more useful than anger. Drek Khan looked at her for a full 3 seconds before he spoke. She did not look away. "You are the commander of this fleet?" he said. His voice was deep, with the rough undertone that Vorkai voices always had. His galactic standard was formal, learned rather than native, but very precise. "I am," Voss said. "Admiral Diplomat Sarah Voss, Human Diplomatic and Military Commission. I'm speaking on behalf of the Human Assembly of Worlds." She paused. "I assume you know who we are?" Another brief silence. "My intelligence records suggest that humans are extinct," Drek Khan said. "Your intelligence records," Voss said, "are inaccurate. I've been aware of that for some time. Specifically, I know about the reclassification of the Conclave Survey report from 1100 years ago. And I know about the classification of the 7th Colonial Contact event from 3,000 years ago." She watched him. His face did not move, but his eyes changed. A very small shift, the kind that a person who had studied Vorkai expressions for as long as she had would recognize as a controlled reaction to something unexpected. "I know your fleet attacked a human colony in that period. I know what happened to that fleet. I know why it was removed from your official history." Drek Khan said nothing. "I'm not here to discuss that," Voss continued. "I'm here to discuss what you've been doing for the last 3 centuries. She touched a control on the table beside her. A data window opened in the shared holographic space between them. A list displayed in clear galactic standard. "This is a documented record of every system the Vorkai Dominion has conquered in the last 300 years. Every world, every population, every recorded casualty figure, cross-referenced with independent sensor records, trade network data, refugee accounts, and, in 14 cases, real-time observation." She let him read the first lines of the list. "We have been watching, War Master, carefully, for a very long time." "You have been hiding," Drek Khan said. His voice was neutral, but there was something underneath it. "No," Voss said simply. "We made a decision about when to act. There is a difference." She moved the data window aside and looked directly at him. "Here is what I am here to tell you. The Vorkai Dominion will withdraw from every occupied system on this list. All military forces will return to Vorkai home space. When all enslaved populations will be released, all occupied governments will be restored. You will begin this process within 72 standard hours of this transmission." She stopped. The communications chamber was very quiet. Somewhere on his bridge, she could see other Vorkai officers. They were all still. "This is not a negotiation," she said. "It is not a request. It is not a suggestion. It is an informed statement of what is going to happen." She folded her hands on the table in front of her. "I would prefer to achieve it without further loss of life on any side. I hope you will make that possible." Drek Khan looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, something changed in his expression. A hardening, a decision being made. He had fought 14 campaigns. He had never surrendered. He had never been told what to do by a single small vessel that arrived ahead of a fleet and spoke to him as if the fleet were beside the point. "You are one ship," he said. "Yes," Voss said. "My fleet has over 1,000 warships in this system. You have sent a single vessel ahead of yours, and you are telling me what my civilization will and will not do." He said it without heat, the way a person states a fact that is so obvious it should not need to be stated. "You understand how this appears?" "I understand exactly how it appears," Voss said. "I need you to understand what it means." He gave an order. She could not hear it, but she saw the officers on his bridge move. She watched the tactical feed on her secondary screen and saw the Vorkai fleet begin to move. 1,000 warships beginning to reposition, forming up, Edda pointing toward the Covenant. She did not change her expression. War Master, she said. He looked at her. I want to show you something, she said. Before your ships get any closer, I want to show you what we've been doing, so that you understand the situation clearly. That is all. You can make whatever decision you want after that, but I want your decision to be an informed one. She nodded to Lieutenant Kavar. The Covenant did not move. It did not raise its shields, which it had not lowered because they had never been raised. It simply sat in space, alone, and waited. On every Vorkai ship that was now moving toward it, every navigation system, every drive system, every weapons control panel, every tactical calculation computer went dark. Not damaged, not destroyed, simply offline. Locked the way a door is locked. There, present, completely intact and entirely inaccessible. On the open communications channel, which was still broadcasting to every conclave receiver and every Selhari network and every independent relay in the region, there was a sound. It was the sound of 1,000 warship bridges suddenly becoming very quiet as the officers on each one reached for their controls and found nothing responding. Drek Khan had not reached for anything. He was standing exactly where he had been standing. His face was completely still. Voss spoke again, and her voice was exactly the same as it had been. Calm, direct, neither triumphant nor apologetic. We've had access to your systems since we crossed into sensor range, she said. We did not use it before now, because I wanted to make the request through proper channels first. That is how we do things. She looked at him. We've also been reading your fleet communications for the last 9 hours. We know what your intelligence officer found in your archive. We know that you know who we are. She paused. War Master, your ships are not damaged. Your crews are safe. I am going to restore your systems in a moment. I am asking you, in the time between now and then, to seriously consider your answer. Not for my benefit, for the benefit of the people on that planet below us and the people on every planet on the list I showed you. She nodded to Kavar again. The Vorkai systems came back online. Now, she said, and her voice was a few degrees quieter, not harder. Quieter, the way a voice gets when the speaker knows that what comes next matters more than what came before. I'm going to step back from this channel for a few minutes. When I return, I would like to hear your decision. She met his eyes. I would like, very much, for it to be the right one. She stepped back from the platform. The holographic display held the connection open. On every receiver, on every ship, on every planetary surface that was watching the emergency broadcast. The Covenant sat in space, small and still and entirely alone, and behind it, barely visible at the edge of sensor range, the first outline of the human formation began to resolve. Not fast, not dramatic. Slowly the way the sun rises, inevitable, patient. Something that was always going to happen, arriving now because the time for it had finally come. On the Selhari Council Hall screens, Van Sol watched the outline take shape. He was counting. He had been counting since the formation first appeared on the relay data. He kept having to stop and start over, not because the numbers were hard, but because each time he thought he had found the edge of the formation and started counting down from there, the sensors would update and show him that there was more beyond it. On Drek Khan's bridge, Sivak was also watching. His claws were folded on his station panel, and he was very still. He had run the new numbers, the updated counts from the formation resolution. He had looked at the fleet strength comparison figures. He had looked at the drive technology readouts and the energy signature analysis and the weapons profile data that human ships had apparently not bothered to mask. He thought, we are looking at what 3,000 years of preparation looks like. He thought we should have left that colony alone. And in the space between the Covenant and the approaching edge of the human Armada, the stars were very clear and very cold and very, very numerous, like all the years that had passed since the silence, each one burning quiet and patient in the dark, waiting for this exact moment. The channel stayed open. The formation kept resolving. Drek Khan stood on his bridge and looked at the screen and said nothing. And somewhere deep in the cold silence of the bridge, where no one could hear it, the question began to form in his mind. The question that had never needed to be asked in 14 campaigns. The question that the entire Vorkai Dominion had not asked in 3,000 years of expansion. Because there had never been anything in the galaxy that made it necessary. What are you people? Nadrek Khan opened a private channel. This was, in itself, an unusual thing for him to do. All of his other communications with opposing forces had been short, formal, and one-directional. He spoke. They listened. He told them what was going to happen. Then it happened. That was how campaigns worked. There was no back and forth, no dialogue, no need for a private line to a single vessel that had parked itself between his fleet and its target and was waiting with the patience of something that had learned patience over a very long time. But the weapon systems had gone dark, and then come back, and the formation at the edge of sensor range had continued to resolve, continued to grow, continued to reveal itself as something that did not match anything in the Vorkai tactical database. Juan and Sivak had shown him the updated fleet comparison numbers with the expression of a person who would very much like to stop knowing what they know. So Drek Khan opened a private channel. My question, he said, when Voss returned to the platform and the link confirmed private, was not rhetorical. Voss looked at him. I know, she said. Sit down if you'd like. This is going to take a few minutes. He did not sit. Vorkai commanders did not sit during active engagements. But he stayed on the channel, which was its own kind of answer. Voss sat. She was quiet for a moment. Not gathering herself, she was already gathered, but taking the brief space between one thing and the next that she always took when a conversation was about to go somewhere that mattered. I'm going to tell you about Earth, she said. Your homeworld, he said. And yes, she folded her hands on the table. Most species, when they describe their homeworld's history to an outsider, start with the good parts, the achievements, the discoveries, the things they're proud of. I'm going to start differently. She told him about war, not the wars humanity had fought with other species. Those came later. She told him about the wars humans had fought with each other. Thousands of years of it. Continent against continent. Nation against nation. City against city. She described the scale of it plainly, without softening the numbers. Tens of millions dead in single conflicts. Whole populations erased. Landscapes turned to ash. She described weapons that humans had invented specifically to kill large numbers of other humans as efficiently as possible, and how those weapons had improved, and generation after generation, because humans were very good at improving things even when those things were terrible. Drek Khan said nothing. He listened. His expression was the expression of someone who expects to hear a story about weakness and is not hearing that. We nearly destroyed ourselves, Voss said. Several times, not once. Not by accident, by choice, by the choices of people who decided that what they wanted was worth the cost, and then found out that the cost was too high only after it had already been paid. She paused. We also developed, in the middle of all that, the idea of rights. The idea that every person, not just the strong ones, not just the ones from the right bloodline or the right nation, every person had a basic claim on dignity and safety and the ability to make their own choices. She looked at Drek Khan. We invented both genocide and human rights, sometimes in the same century. That is what we are. He was quiet for a moment. That is a contradiction, he said. Yes, she said. We know. We have been living inside that contradiction for a very long time. It is not comfortable. She paused. But it has one practical effect that I think is relevant to your situation. We are the only species in the known galaxy who has experienced from the inside what happens when the strong decide that the weak simply don't matter. We did it to ourselves. We know exactly where it leads. We know what it costs. However, we are incapable of seeing it happen to someone else and treating it as someone else's problem. On every receiver that was still monitoring the broadcast, which was most of them, because the emergency relay was still open, because Voss had said she wanted everyone to hear this, and no one had shut it down. The words moved outward across the star systems at the speed of light. In the conclave headquarters, a chamber full of senior diplomats from 12 different species had stopped their own emergency session to watch the feed. Some of them were old enough to have read the historical files on humanity, and they sat in the careful stillness of people hearing a confirmation of something they had half believed for a very long time. In the archive room on Ethan 4, Vainsol had stopped moving. He stood in front of his screen and watched and listened with the full, concentrated attention of someone who has waited their whole life to see a thing they were told was only a legend. Fenlo, standing beside him, spoke quietly. Elder Vansol, she's describing us, what the Vorkai did to our colonies. She's describing it to him directly. Yes, Vansol said. He did not look away from the screen. She's telling him the history of her own species to explain why they came. Yes. Fenlo was quiet for a moment. That is the strangest way I have ever seen someone deliver an ultimatum. It is not an ultimatum, Vansol said. An ultimatum says, do this or we will hurt you. She is saying, do this because it is right, and if you choose not to, we will still stop you, but we would rather you understood why. That is different. He paused. That is, if the archive is accurate, very human. Back on the Covenant, Voss had moved to the reason for the silence. She described it without drama, simply, clearly, the way she described everything. 3,000 years ago, humanity had looked at the galaxy and seen a pattern. Not a new pattern, a familiar one. The same pattern that had led to some of the worst things in their own history. The civilizations with bigger fleets took what they wanted from the ones with smaller fleets, and the ones with smaller fleets called for help, and help rarely came, because everyone was looking out for themselves. It was the old logic. The logic that said might was right and the strong owed nothing to the weak. We had that argument on our own world for thousands of years, Voss said. Every time we thought we'd settled it, it came back. And every time it came back, people died. A lot of people. She looked at the War Master. When we came out into the galaxy and saw the same argument being made at a larger scale, we had a decision to make. We could try to stop it from inside. Join the conclave, make alliances, try to influence things slowly. Or we could do what we have always done best, which is to go home, look at the problem clearly, and build something that could actually fix it rather than just push it around. You abandoned the galaxy, Drek Khan said. The word he used was not quite abandoned. It was a Vorkai word that meant something closer to withdrew from your obligations. No, Voss said. We made a long-term decision. There is a difference between leaving and withdrawing. When you leave, you stop caring. When you withdraw, you are preparing to come back, she paused. We watched, the whole time, everything that happened. We recorded it. We built a complete historical record of every conflict, every conquest, every civilization that was taken apart by someone bigger, including this one. She gestured briefly toward the data file she had shown him earlier. We didn't disappear. We just went quiet, and we built. For 3,000 years, Drek Khan said. It was not a question. For 3,000 years, Voss confirmed. Because if we were going to come back and say that what you were doing was wrong, that preying on civilizations that can't defend themselves is wrong, we needed to be in a position where we could do more than just say it. She met his eyes. We needed to be able to make it true, not just for today, permanently. There was a silence. Not an uncomfortable silence, a thinking silence. Then Drek Khan said something that surprised her. He said it quietly, as if he was not entirely sure he wanted to say it out loud. My civilization has no word, he said, for what you're describing. Voss waited. For stopping something, he said, not because it threatens you, not because you were ordered to, not for gain or territory or survival, because it is the right thing. He seemed to be working through the concept in real time, turning it over with the careful attention of someone encountering an idea that has no framework in their existing worldview. We have words for honor in battle, for loyalty to the fleet, for the glory of conquest. We have no word for what you are describing. I know, Voss said gently. How is that possible? He asked it without hostility. He asked it the way a person asks a question they genuinely cannot answer. A civilization that would spend 3,000 years preparing to stop something they don't benefit from stopping. That would come here to a system that is not theirs, to protect a species they have never met. We've met them now, Voss said. In a way. And do it not for territory, not for resources, not for any reason a rational calculation would justify. He paused. It is not rational. Voss almost smiled. It was a very small thing. A brief upward movement at the corner of her mouth. You're right, she said. By a certain kind of calculation, it isn't rational. The cost is very high. The benefit to us, in material terms, is almost nothing. She looked at him steadily. We came anyway, because some things matter more than the calculation. That is something our history taught us the hard way. We are not interested in the galaxy learning it the same way we did. The private channel held both of them in silence for a moment. Then there was movement on his bridge. One of the sub-commanders, a larger Vorkai with aggressive coloring, moving with the fast certainty of someone who had already made up his mind, stepped into frame behind Drek Khan and spoke loud enough for the channel to pick up. His name, as Voss later learned, was Sub-War Master Greth Von, and he had come up through the Dominion's hardest campaigns and believed with genuine conviction that the only real answer to any challenge was the one that came from a weapons array. He was not interested in the conversation. He was not interested in what the human was saying, or what Drek Khan was thinking, or what 3,000 years of careful preparation looked like from the outside. He was interested in the fact that there was a single enemy vessel in range, in a planet below that was not yet finished, in a fleet behind him that was still capable of fighting, and that the only thing stopping all of those things from resolving in the obvious way was a war master who was standing on his own bridge having a conversation with a small, soft-skinned creature on a medium-sized ship. He spoke 4 words. We do not surrender. And then he gave the order. Not to Drek Khan, to his own ship. A direct order to his personal command vessel and the 6 ships closest to it. A strike formation, angled toward Ethan 4, weapons hot, moving fast. Not toward the Covenant, toward the planet. Because Greth Von was not trying to win anymore. He was past that. He was making a point. He was saying, in the language that he understood better than any other, we are Vorkai and we do not bend. And if we cannot win, then we will at least make sure that we take something with us. Drek Khan turned from the screen. His face had changed. Not to anger, but to something older and heavier than anger. Voss was already on her feet. She looked at the tactical feed on her secondary screen, at the 7 Vorkai ships breaking formation and driving hard toward the planet's surface, and she closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds that she used to take in the full reality of the situation, that she had been close, very close, and that sometimes close was not close enough, and that now there was a planet below them full of people who were counting on the next set of decisions being made correctly. She opened her eyes. She looked at Drek Khan, who was still on the channel, who was looking back at her with an expression she would later describe to her log as the face of someone watching 2 worlds collide and not being certain which one they are standing on. She said, I'm sorry this happened, truly. She paused. But I made a promise to the people on that planet. I intend to keep it. She turned to Kavar. She did not raise her voice. She did not change her tone. She gave the order with the same calm that she had used for everything else. And the only difference was the weight underneath it. The weight of someone who has been patient for a very long time and is now done being patient. Open the fleet channel, she said. Tell them to move. The fleet channel opened at 0314 standard time, and the order moved through it like current through a wire. Fast, clean, and with absolute certainty. For the crews of the human Armada, it was not a surprise. They had been at full readiness for the last 4 hours. They had watched the feed from the Covenant, the same feed that the Conclave receivers were watching, the same feed that Ven Sol had been watching in his archive room. They had listened to Admiral Voss speak, and they had waited. And now the waiting was over, and the thing they had come here to do was beginning. The Armada moved. It did not move the way that military fleets in most species' histories moved. In a broad, aggressive charge, weapons firing, everything pointed forward in a blunt display of force. It moved with the kind of precision that only comes from a very long time of practice. Each ship in the formation knew exactly where it was going, and exactly what its role was. There were no redundant orders, no confusion, no delays. The formation split into sections as it moved, some heading for the outer engagement zones, some moving to cover the orbital approaches, some driving straight and fast toward the 7 Vorkai ships that were burning hard for Ethan 4's surface. The 7 Vorkai ships were fast. Greth Vaughn had made sure of that. He had picked the fastest vessels in the strike group when he gave the order, because he was not a fool about tactics, even if his decision was not a tactical one. He believed perhaps that speed would make the difference, that if he moved fast enough, the human fleet would not be able to react in time, that the planet would burn before anyone could stop it, and that would be its own kind of answer to everything Voss had said on that channel. He was wrong, not because the human ships were faster, though some of them were, but because the human fleet had not waited for him to move before it began calculating where he was going. The moment Greth Vaughn had stepped forward on that bridge and spoken those 4 words, the human tactical network had flagged the change in his posture, the shift in his movement, the direction his eyes had been tracking, and had begun adjusting. By the time his ships left formation and fired their drives, 3 human vessels were already in position. The first human ship to reach the intercept point was a midweight cruiser called HWCS Meridian. When it came in on an angle that forced Greth Vaughn's lead vessel to break its trajectory or collide, and it held its angle without deviation, without hesitation, without any sign that the crew on board was concerned about the math of 2 large objects moving toward the same point in space at high speed. Greth Vaughn's lead vessel broke trajectory. It had to. The geometry left no other option. The second and third human ships pushed the remaining 6 Vorkai vessels into a tight corridor, not surrounding them, not firing on them, but using precise positioning to make every angle, except the one pointing away from the planet, geometrically difficult. It was like watching someone herd animals, a comparison that would have enraged Greth Vaughn if he had heard it, but one that several Selhari watching the orbital feeds would later use in their accounts. But the most important thing was the 7th ship, the one at the back of Greth Vaughn's formation, the one that had broken a little late, the one that found itself in a gap that the 2 flanking human vessels had not quite closed in time. It was the largest of the 7, Greth Vaughn's own flagship, the Vorkai Iron Fang. And it had not broken trajectory. It was still aimed at the planet. At this range, a ship the size of the Iron Fang, moving at the speed it was moving, had enough mass and momentum to cause catastrophic surface damage if it hit. Greth Vaughn was not, at this point, planning to pull back. He had made his decision. He had said what he believed. The Iron Fang was going to complete its run. On the bridge of the HSV Covenant, Voss watched the tactical feed and felt the thing that she always felt at this kind of moment. Not fear, but a clear and complete understanding of what was at stake and what it was going to cost to do the right thing. She opened the direct channel to Meridian. "Commander Chen," she said. "Admiral," said the voice on the other end. Commander Lin Chen, 37 years old, 12 years in the fleet, steady voice. "The Iron Fang is going to hit the surface unless it's stopped," Voss said. "I need you to put the Meridian in its path." A brief pause. Not hesitation, calculation. The kind of pause that a very good officer uses to make sure they understand the order completely before they carry it out. "That's a full impact intercept, Admiral," Chen said. "At their current speed and mass, we'll take significant hull damage, possibly critical." "Yes," Voss said. Another pause, shorter this time. "Understood," Chen said. "Meridian moving." What happened next was watched by every feed monitoring the engagement and was recorded in full resolution by 6 independent sensor platforms, and was later used in every academy that trained military and diplomatic personnel in the 200 years that followed. Not because it was the largest or most dramatic thing that happened that day. It wasn't. But because of what it demonstrated, clearly and without any ambiguity, about the way humans made decisions. The Meridian moved into the path of the Iron Fang and held position. It did not fire. It did not threaten. It simply stopped in the middle of the trajectory and let its mass and its presence say the thing that no weapon system needed to say: "You will not pass." and the Iron Fang hit the Meridian at a glancing angle. Not head-on because the Meridian's crew had positioned the impact as well as it could be positioned, angling to deflect rather than absorb. The sound of the collision, picked up on the Selhari orbital monitors, was a deep, resonant strike, like a bell being hit hard. The Meridian spun out, trailing debris from her port section, her drives flickering. The Iron Fang was thrown off its trajectory by the impact, rolling in a slow arc that took it away from the planet and into open space. The planet was safe. On the Meridian's bridge, the emergency systems were already running. The hull breach was contained. The drives were damaged but not destroyed. The crew had absorbed the collision in their impact harnesses and come out of it shaken and bruised and, with the medical officer would later confirm, entirely alive. Commander Chen opened the channel to the Covenant. Hull breach on decks 5 through 7, she said. Drive capacity at 40%. Crew status. A brief pause, the sound of a confirmation coming through. All present. Minor injuries. No fatalities. Voss let out a breath that she had been holding since the moment she gave the order. Well done, Commander. Well done. On Ethan 4, in the council hall, several Selhari counselors who had been watching the feed broke into sound. Not words, but the instinctive vocalization of people who have just watched something happen that they were not certain was going to go the right way. Fenlo made a sound like all the air going out of him at once. Wenzel stood at his screen, perfectly still, watching the tactical display show the Iron Fang spinning away harmlessly into open space. His glow was the brightest it had been in years. The battle was not over. In the wider orbital space, the main engagement was continuing. The Vorkai fleet, the majority of it, the 993 ships that had not joined Grethvon's strike, was facing a human force that was larger in number, more sophisticated in technology, and operating with a level of coordination that made it functionally different from any fleet battle in recorded conclave history. The human ships did not fight the way most species fought. They did not rush forward to destroy. They moved between Vorkai vessels and the planet's surface, positioning themselves as a physical barrier, while using their superior speed and maneuverability to prevent attacks rather than to deliver them. When Vorkai ships fired, human vessels moved to intercept the shots, not because they had to, but because the math said it was more efficient than trying to neutralize the firing ship. And when they did engage directly, when a Vorkai ship pushed through a defensive line and became an active danger, the human response was precise in a way that was almost surgical. Weapons that targeted drive systems without touching life support, targeting that disabled bridge controls while leaving the rest of the ship intact, the ability to put a weapons discharge through a gap the size of a porthole and hit the fire control processor behind it without scratching the surrounding hull. Vorkai's ships were being neutralized one by one. Their crews were intact, their hulls were intact, but they were drifting, unable to move, unable to fight, simply present in space as evidence of what had just happened. No one was dying. This somehow was the most unsettling thing for the Vorkai fleet commanders. They understood combat. They understood destruction. They did not understand an enemy that seemed to be putting as much effort into not killing them as any conventional force would put into doing the opposite. Sub-War Master Grethvon, in the drifting Iron Fang, found the emergency communications working and screamed orders into his channel for the remaining active Vorkai ships to fire, to charge, to die before they surrendered. Some of them listened. Most of them, looking at the drifting, silent shapes of their neutralized companions and at the precise, patient human ships moving between them and their objectives, made the calculation that their fleet commander had made in a side room of the Vorkai Pride several hours earlier. The calculation that said, "This is not a fight we are going to win." Drek Khan was still on the Covenant's channel. He had been watching the engagement from the beginning. He had said very little. He had watched his ships being neutralized without being destroyed, one by one, with the efficiency of a cleanup operation rather than a battle. He had watched Grethvon's strike fail. He had watched the Meridian put itself in the path of the Iron Fang and take the hit so the planet wouldn't have to. He had watched it all, and something had been happening in him during that watching. Something that the Vorkai language had no word for, which was appropriate, because Voss had said exactly that not long ago. He reached up and removed his command insignia from his collar. It was a heavy engraved piece, rank and bloodline and campaign record, all pressed into metal and worn over the heart. He had worn it for 30 years. He set it down on his command panel and opened the channel. "Voss," he said. She looked at him. "Yes. Tell your fleet to stop." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded to Kavar, and the fleet-wide channel opened. "All vessels," she said, "hold position. Maintain defensive lines. Do not engage." She turned back to Drek Khan. "The engagement is paused," she said. He looked at the insignia on his panel. He was quiet for a moment, in the way that a very large thing is quiet when it has decided to stop moving. "We call it Veth Karun," he said. "What I am doing. It means the recognition that an opponent has proven something. Not just one. Proven something." He met her eyes. "A war master who performs Veth Karun acknowledges that the opponent's strength is real, that the argument is over." He paused. "I am performing Veth Karun." Voss looked at him without any expression of triumph. She simply looked at him. "I accept that acknowledgement," she said, "and I want to be very clear about what comes next, so there is no ambiguity. The human assembly is not seeking to control the Vorkai dominion, annex its territory, or impose governance on its people. We are seeking three things: the withdrawal from all occupied systems, the release of all enslaved populations, and the beginning of a process, a long process, I know, of accountability and restoration." She paused. "We are not your conquerors. We are not your rulers. We are the party that has come to tell you that what you have been doing to others is going to stop, and that stopping it does not have to mean your destruction." Drek Khan was quiet. "My people will not accept this easily," he said. "I know," Voss said. "It will take time. We understand that. We are not impatient." "You have been preparing for 3,000 years, he said. There was something in his voice that might, from a Vorkai, have been a small and deeply reluctant recognition of something like respect. "I suppose not." The emergency broadcast channel, which had been carrying the entire exchange, was still open. In the conclave chamber, the senior diplomats were no longer in their seats. They were standing, most of them, watching the feed with the full attention that important things command. On Ethan 4, the Selhari Council had stopped arguing and was gathered in a single room around a single screen. On dozens of worlds that had survived Vorkai conquest, people who had lost things that could not be replaced were watching in the private dark of their homes and their thoughts. And in the archive room on Ethan 4, Vayan's soul finally moved. He moved slowly. He was old and the last 3 days had been long, and he walked to his terminal and sat down. He found the file he had been looking for, the archive entry on humanity, the one filed under historical accounts, unverified, the one marked status, unknown, presumed extinct. He deleted the last 4 words. He sat for a moment, looking at the empty space where they had been. Then he thought about what to put in their place. He thought about the signal on the dead frequency, about the formation that the sensors could not count, about the meridian putting itself between a planet and a ship because the math said it was the right thing to do, about what Voss had said on that channel, about the contradiction and the cost and the reason they came anyway. He typed 4 words, status. They never left. He looked at it. Then he added a note in the small text field below, in the old scholar style he had used for 60 years. Note: the archive entry which describes this civilization as dangerous was accurate. The archive entry which describes them as relentless was also accurate. What the archive failed to note, and what I record here for those who read this after me, is that they are relentless not for conquest, not for glory, not for the survival of themselves alone, but for the idea that no civilization should have to burn alone in the dark and hear nothing back. They withdrew because they were not ready. They returned because, at last, they were. And they came not as rulers. They came as something the galaxy had not had before and did not have a word for. They came as the answer. He saved the file. Outside, the burning sky of Ethan 4 was changing. The Vorkai warships were no longer moving in attack patterns. The bombardment had stopped. In the silence after the guns, the planet's natural sounds were returning. The distant rush of wind across the open plains north of the city, the faint sounds of people in the streets below beginning to understand that the thing they had been certain was going to happen was not now going to happen. Fenlo came to stand beside Von Saul and looked at the screen. He read the updated archive entry. He read it twice. Then he looked out the window at the sky. The human armada was still there, holding position in the deep space beyond the planet. Thousands of ships, still in perfect formation, patient and steady and prescient the way a kept promise is present. Real and solid, and exactly what it said it was going to be. "What happens now?" Fenlo asked. Van Sol looked at the sky for a long time before he answered. "What should have happened a very long time ago," he said. "Someone starts cleaning up the mess." He paused. "And this time, someone stays to make sure it gets done properly." He looked at the archive entry one more time. Then he closed the file, stood up slowly, and walked to the window to watch the morning. The real morning. With a one coming, now that the fires were out and the guns were quiet, begin to light the sky above Ethan 4. It was still a scarred sky. It would take time to heal, but it was brightening, and it was clear, and somewhere up in the cold and patient dark beyond it, the Armada held its position. It had come a very long way. It was not going anywhere. In the years that followed, the Conclave of Worlds established the Joint Restoration Commission, with human advisors present at every level. 14 occupied systems were freed. Greth Von was tried before a joint tribunal and found guilty of war crimes under the new Conclave protocols that human diplomats had spent 3 months drafting. Drek Khan did not stand trial. He stood instead as the first Vorkai witness for the prosecution. The 7th Conquest Fleet was formally disbanded. 3 of its vessels, repaired and repainted, joined the new Conclave peacekeeping force. The Meridian was repaired. Commander Chen was promoted. She named her next command ship after the planet she had protected. Van Saul lived for another 11 years. He spent most of them updating the archive. Not just the human files, but all of them. He said in the last public address he gave before his health made travel impossible, that the most important thing an archivist could do was make sure the record was honest about what happened, so that the next generation knew what was possible. Not just the wars and the losses, the times it went right too, the times someone came. The archive entry he wrote was never changed. They never left.